and welcome to this month's edition of Slugger TV. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the impact of the protocol, the debate around it, some of the main political developments that have happened since the start of 2021. You're very welcome to this edition of Slugger TV. And to go through these fascinating topics, we have the political reporter of Belfast Live, Mr. Brendan Hughes, and we have Irish News security correspondent and columnist Allison Morris. You're both very welcome to the show. Brendan, I want to go to you first because you've been all over this story. So let's start off with start of the year, the protocol comes in and we hear language about working the protocol, maximizing our potential with the protocol. And then about 2 weeks into the year, the narrative very strongly changes. Pick us up at that point, Brendan. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think there was an effort by some in the DUP, particularly Arlene Foster, at the start of the year to try and downplay the implications of the protocol among unionists. You know, the language really was by Arlene Foster, you know, this has happened, I don't like it, but we have to deal with it and we're going to try and make the best of it. That was the language that was coming out. But clearly there were elements within unionism and particularly within the DUP that were agitating on the sides. And it appears over the weeks that have followed, they have moved the rest of the DUP to the position which it is in now, which is to scrap the protocol. And the DUP has obviously come up with a 5-point plan now as to how it says it's going to frustrate the protocol and eventually lead to it being scrapped. And that's where we're at the moment. We have the DUP presenting a petition, an online petition, which they had to Parliament. And that's going to be debated in Parliament. And we have now unionists joining around a legal action to try and have the protocol in some way struck out. Now, a lot of these things to me and to many others seem to be more like a publicity stunt, really. You know, this is an attempt to show that there is an effort being made to try and scrap the protocol. But like actions that we've seen in the past, whether that was around the flag protest, whether that was, you know, the graduated response or the unionist forum or in-out ministers that we saw under the leadership of Peter Robinson, I don't think anyone is expecting that any of these moves that are being made by the DUP and others will come to anything. And eventually we will end up back where we started, which is really that the protocol is here to stay and that it's up to people in Northern Ireland, the British, the Irish and the EU administrations to make it work as best as possible. And that will involve ensuring that if it's necessary, grace periods are extended and making sure that there are any derogations that can be made to make it as frictionless as possible. But really, this is a result of Brexit. This happened because every other option that was put on the table post-2016 in the EU referendum, every other option that was put on the table to try and ensure that there would not be a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland and ensure that there was a frictionless border between Northern Ireland and Britain was rejected. And so therefore we have ended up with a protocol, and really that therefore means that that's what we have to work with.
Okay, Alison, what have you made about how the political debate, the temperature has certainly become very heated? And I know security has, in your portfolio, I know that that's been a big part of this as well. So what have you made of it?
It has. And I mean, the thing is that we know when the workers were pulled out of the ports in both Belfast and Larne, that was done in a way that I, as a security journalist, have never seen done before. So what usually happens is that they would ask for a security assessment. They would assess whether there was a threat to those staff, and then obviously there's a duty occurred to protect them. Instead, we know that Edwin Poots, on his way out the door before he went to go and have his treatment, and we all wish him well with that, had actually made a decision to pull the staff out, and then that was followed in relation to what advice the council say they were given, although they're being quite vague about that. The PSNM, when I spoke to the chief constable after that, said that there was no credible intelligence to show that there was ever any threat to those staff. And you could see that was all part of a sort of ratcheting up of pressure on Arlene Foster and pressure on unionism in general, to show that there was anger at the protocol and trying to do something about it. I think that the DUP are in a really difficult position here. You know, they campaigned for Brexit. They got Brexit. It isn't the Brexit that they want, but we're not quite sure what Brexit they did want because they rejected every other form of Brexit that was laid on the table. Did they actually want a hard Brexit with a hard border in the island? What is it that they actually wanted? At this point in time, those negotiations are over. It can be tweaked in the protocol. There's room there, I think, for to be elements of it to be changed to try and make things run smoothly. And that's actually happening every day. Behind the scenes, day in, day out, there are people working to make sure that all those problems that existed are all ironed out so the trade can run smoothly. So what you have left is not a practical problem. It's not a practical problem of whether you can get your Amazon deliveries or your pot plants or anything else. It's an ideological problem. It's an issue now that unionism have with the fact that we are economically a place apart from the rest of the UK. And the EU can't fix that. And the Irish government can't fix that. That is a problem between the DUP and Boris Johnson. That is the only two people that's a problem between, and that's the only two people that can solve it. I think back to when my teenagers were when my children were stroppy teenagers, and I would say something to them, and they said, that sounds like it's more of a you problem than a me problem. What is it you want me to do about that? Right now, when the DUP are giving off about what Simon Coveney's saying or what Leo Varadkar's saying or what Micheál Martin's saying, they should really say, look, mate, this is more of a you problem than a me problem. You need to go and deal with that where it counts over in Westminster, because it's certainly not something that we can do anything about. We can't do anything about how British you feel, and that's what the problem is now. There was pressure that came from Westminster, and we know that those Westminster MPs, Sammy Wilson and Ian Paisley, you remember the picture of them, sitting on the rooftop celebrating with the bad boys of Brexit. They were the people who championed this. They were the people who wanted this. The fact then that I think what really spooked them was that Lucy poll, which showed that their popularity was dropping. But not only that, it's the rise of the one-man band that is Jim Allister. That will have scared them, and so there's a attempt to claw back from that. But we have seen this in the past, and try and out Jim Allister is a mistake, because it cannot be done, because every time they move to meet his position, he will move somewhere else. He'll take it further to the extreme. And where do you go then? That is a direction of travel that you're going in, to try and constantly keep up with that, rather than maybe say, well, let's forget about the fact that we can't, be more radical than Jim Allister, but what do our base actually want? What do the people, our actual core voters want? Because they are the people that they'll lose, not to the Ulster Unionist Party, because that hasn't been the direction of travel those voters have went in, to the Alliance Party. And if I were a unionist and I was looking at the future of the union and how to save it, I would know, you would know that isn't the way to try and protect the future of the union. The way to protect the future of the union is to make Northern Ireland a successful place to live, a profitable place to live. And right now, I think that, we see people that don't actually know how to do that, that they're still chasing the sort of ideological element of what it means to be British from Northern Ireland, rather than looking at the practical elements of it.
Yeah, and Brendan, just as Alison was pointing out there, we are seeing, for example, bodies like Invest NI preparing literature saying, oh, great, invest in Northern Ireland. You've got access into the UK market. You've got access into the European market. So and obviously for anyone who doesn't know, Invest NI, it is an arm's length body, but it falls under the remit of the Department of the Economy, which is administered by Diane Dodds from the DUP. Brendan, what have you made about, are we really maybe not doing enough to really hammer home that? I see the protocol parties are now saying we need to be hammering home this message more of the benefits.
Well, I think there is once again this element of doublespeak coming over the past number of weeks since we exited the European Union for good. We have on one hand the DUP and other unionist parties are saying to scrap the protocol, but at the same time, we've reported ourselves that internally within the Economy Department, which is run by DUP Minister Diane Dodds, they have been preparing a paper which points out that coronavirus, climate change and Brexit are existential threats to Northern Ireland, but it points out that the protocol, which puts Northern Ireland in a unique position, is an opportunity for Northern Ireland, and that there are ways that it could benefit from that in terms of different industries like manufacturing industries, that sort of thing. And this sort of paper is being prepared internally by a department run by a DUP minister, and according to the information that we saw, overseen the paper in its draft form has been overseen by her special advisor, former DUP MLA Alistair Ross. And this is the type of paper that's been produced by that department. But what we see on the airwaves and in the Assembly instead is that the DUP and other unionist parties are saying that the protocol in its entirety is bad and therefore it should be scrapped in its entirety. And we're not getting any solutions as to what should go in its place. So therefore, I think that there needs to be a bit of reality brought to the situation. As we know, the protocol is an agreement between the European Union and the British government. That's the place as to whether it should continue on or not. But for Northern Ireland, there will be industries that will be negatively impacted by the protocol, and we're seeing the outworkings of that because I suppose they weren't given an opportunity to prepare for the protocol. But at the same time, as this beds in, Northern Ireland is going to be in the unique position where it is both wedded to the European Union or connected to the European Union, having access to that market, as well as being able to have unfettered access between Northern Ireland products moving to Great Britain. And so therefore that's a unique opportunity for Northern Ireland that isn't available to places like Scotland. And the people in Scotland, MSPs, are calling for Scotland to have a similar deal to Northern Ireland. So really those sorts of things are the things that we should be talking up to try and encourage industry to get here, rather than downplaying it and trying to get rid of it altogether.
But Alison, I mean, obviously there's a big psychological problem here as well, and that's primarily the thing. I mean, walking around Belfast, you see big banners saying X area will never accept a border down the Irish Sea, and there is a real sentiment out there among some parts of the Unionist community who believe that this is a real attack on their Britishness. I mean, why do you think that message about what Brendan's just said there isn't getting through, or do they just not care?
I do think that, we've seen that with those meetings, those town hall meetings, those Boris betrayal meetings. And interestingly, that you can trace back the change in attitude to many of the senior members of the DP to those meetings when they started then swaying towards, no protocol at all. But the point is that they haven't produced an alternative. They can, I think, by, getting behind these court cases, save face, and then try and tweak aspects of it and show that they are, this is our big success. We managed to change this part of the protocol. For loyalism, that's something that I think if you take what they have seen as a sort of shift in position and a move away from their Britishness and lots of talk of border polls and unity and all sorts of other things. I mean, I'm not of the camp that, that thinks that you should take great joy over the fact that, loyalists are grieving over what they see as a slow and gradual sort of response to the march towards United Ireland. I think back to what caused, when this island was partitioned, 100 years ago, and the trouble that caused. And I don't think that, any people that become a minority, regardless of what happens to this island in the future, should be treated or mocked in any way. We need to take into consideration that there are general fearful feelings. And the reason why they're fearful mainly, they're fearful for the loss of their Britishness and their sovereignty. They're fearful of what the future may hold. They're fearful of the pace of change, which has been much quicker than many people accepted. But mainly they are fearful because they're told to be fearful. They're told constantly to be fearful. They're told to be angry. They're told to be afraid. And they're told by their own politicians that that's how they should be feeling. I think that there's a possibility to change that. Will that be changed? Will the politicians style that down? I don't think so. And then let's, not reflect all the blame over there. You then need to look at, nationalism and what our role and what has been the role of nationalist politicians in this. And there has been a degree of exploiting, people's fear. And who can, a politician will kick a ball in the open goal any day of the week if they see it, and why wouldn't they? But we need to remember that this place can destabilise very quickly. It's okay using that for political gain, but don't be using that to destabilise an entire community, because that has a negative impact on all of us, and it has a negative impact on all of us going forward. So everyone has a responsibility to be careful in the way they use their language and how they think. And just because other people did something in the past doesn't mean that we should all be doing it now in the future. I think that there's a real difficulty here, especially, I suppose, for Sinn Féin, because their unity project is basically who they are. That is who that party is, and it's what they campaign for. So in some ways, do you make the protocol work? Do you make this place work? Do you make the North more profitable? Do you make it this place where investment comes in, because that's going to sustain it longer? Let's face it, that is going to make this place economically sustainable for how many other decades going forward. Or do you do nothing to help try and change that and make that protocol work and allow this place to fall apart and therefore strengthen calls for a border poll and ball for unity, and say we'll be better off economically this way than we are there? Because let's face it, the unity debate has changed dramatically in the last 5 years, from one about identity to one about economy and about where we will be better off socially and economically as people going forward. We don't as much say, my Irishness means I have to belong here. We do now say, would we be better off economically staying with the EU and therefore rejoining Ireland and doing it that way? We talk about it in practical terms, I think, now, much more than in terms of, flag waving. The sort of nation once again unity project of my childhood doesn't exist anymore. This is something very different. And therefore then, do you make that work or do you not make it work? Which one is important to your campaign?
I was just going to say that's actually an interesting point, possibly going forward. If the protocol is, as some people are saying, the best of both worlds, that Northern Ireland has access to both the EU market and the UK market, then if it does work out and it is a good thing for Northern Ireland economically in that way, then it's going to be a bigger task for nationalism to convince people to want to join the United Ireland. Because you'll be telling people that in order to join with the Republic, you will therefore have to leave this special position that you're in economically, where you have access to both markets without any sort of friction along the border for that. And so if it does work out, and for nationalist parties, if they are encouraging that this protocol is the thing that has to be implemented and implemented in the best way for both borders, then it's going to be a difficult challenge going forward if they want to convince people to try and create a united Ireland.
It is, because what you're doing is you're not trying to convince the two people on the two edges. There are people, if we had a border poll tomorrow, would vote to either for United Ireland or for the main part of the UK, regardless of what the consequences of that were. I remember interviewing Marvin Gibson, and he said, I will sleep in a cardboard box in the street as long as I can remain part of the UK. And there are people, who have been Republicans all their lives, and this is their lifetime ambition, and they don't care about those things. They go, iron that out later. Let's just unite the country again. But those people aren't who, a referendum would be trying to win over. It's the people in the middle who are going, well, where will my children and my grandchildren be better off? Where will we be better educated? Where will my healthcare be like? What are my job opportunities? What happens to third level education? Who pays for that? All of those questions are what's going to swing them. So if this place, as we keep being told, this is the best of both worlds and it's going to thrive, those people will think, well, other than take something I don't know and step into the unknown and take a chance, will we just understand like this? So there's a real, unionism could be using this to their benefit so much. They really could, and they just don't. I mean, I think that they fail to understand that Micheál Martin is the biggest ally they have, in trying to retain the union, because anything that he does to try and promote Irish unity is just basically going to give votes to Sinn Féin. So he's never going to do that. He would be their biggest ally in this. They haven't recognised that yet. They haven't recognised that there is scope in them using the protocol to strengthen the union for, however many generations still to come. And instead, they're constantly telling people to be afraid and fearful, and things are being taken away from them. And we've used those kind of politics for so long, and they haven't worked. At some stage, maybe someone said, this isn't working as a tactic. Maybe we should try something else.
Okay. And I want to just ask this, because again, the two of you have been in the middle of kind of covering this. There has been a lot of debate about how the media covers this. Alison, you were talking there about how much coverage you give, who to, how credible are threats, and are the media, we have seen this over the past few weeks. And again, this is a Twitter conversation, so it isn't like it's being talked about I was about to say in bars, but sure, we can't do that anymore. We'll get to that in the next segment.
If you're talking about this in bars, I'm phoning that PSNI outline. Tell them, what are you doing?
I promise you, I'll be nowhere near them in about 3 months. But I'll go to you first on this, Alison. About the media coverage of this. Because it is a delicate balance. You don't want to inflame the situation, but equally, you don't want to ignore something that's going on out there. So how do you think that balance is being struck?
Look, there's a threat. There's always a threat of violence here. That always exists just below the surface. But you got to say, how big is that threat? So dissident Republicans do pose a threat to border infrastructure. And that doesn't mean that you need 500 men armed to the teeth. 20 people living in a border county could cause problems to border infrastructure. And we know that. Do I think that when 27 member states were negotiating their trade deal, they were worried about 20 boys living in Cavan? No, I don't think they were. I don't think that was high up on their list of priorities. The dissident Republican threat can, in many ways, be controlled, and we have seen that recently with those sort of high-profile arrests and the removal of leaderships of organisations. And they can, in many ways, take that threat out quite easily if that is the case through the courts and through arrests and all sorts of other things, the removal of weapons, they closely monitor them. Then you have loyalism. Do they pose a threat? Because you can always say that they can pose a threat. Those main loyalist groupings continue to recruit long after the ceasefires, and they continue to recruit to this day. And they have hundreds, if not thousands, of very young men as members. Most of their members are dormant. They don't do anything. They show up once a year at a commemoration, and march alongside them on Remembrance Day, but they are not active members of that. There are very young men who can be mobilised very quickly to cause street disturbances and block roads. They don't pose a threat to national security in any way, but they could pose a threat just to the day-to-day functioning of this. We haven't seen that yet, and I don't believe, the PSNI have said that they believe that COVID is maybe stopping street protests. I'm not really sure if you believe so much that this is causing a threat to your sovereignty and a threat to your identity that you're going to worry about social distancing when you're deciding whether or not you're going to protest or not. So I would say that shows that there's not an appetite there for that. There just isn't. There is an appetite for making a lot of noise. And remember that in some ways, while we hear a lot of talk about trying to remove paramilitaries from the stage, there are times that angry dog, regardless of what side it's on, can be quite useful for politicians to use to try and get leverage from either government or whatever it is they're negotiating. So sometimes you can see why those paramilitaries haven't gone, because every now and then it's useful to point to say there's an angry dog in my back garden which I'm trying to control here, and if you don't do this, I'll find it difficult to control it. So that they become quite useful in some ways. I don't think that either of them pose a massive threat, but remember, we live in an island where the cycles of violence have come and went every 50 or so years. That's not to say that couldn't happen in the future. And what I always say is there's nothing now that I would be massively fearful of in terms of either distance or loyalists, but that's not to say that couldn't change very quite quickly going forward into the future. We have seen, if you look back in history, decisions that were made, political decisions that were made, and the result of those decisions, things like internment. You make a decision about something like internment, you destabilise the entire country and you bring people flocking to groups and because of things like that. And there's no doubt that internment was used as a recruitment tool for the IRA. There was no doubt that it prolonged the length of the Troubles immensely. No doubt that the British caused that by introducing those draconian measures. So let's think about that and think about, can we make sensible measures in the future? Because one wrong turn and to make such a massive political decision like that could very easily destabilise that. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to be radicalising young people who should be living a very different kind of life than what we lived, in the 70s and 80s and the 90s. Their lives are very different, but you don't want to twist that and turn that on. And sometimes people can make decisions on the flip of a coin that can massively change the political direction of this place that we live in, and we've seen that in the past. So while I would say I don't think that there's a threat from either now, as in I don't think there's a massive threat. That's not to say they can't block roads or block ports or stop lorries getting in and out. I don't think that there's an actual organised threat on either side that could be credibly used in order to either keep the protocol or get rid of it, or get rid of a border or keep a border. But I do think that we need to be careful with our language going forward, because remember, there are people who are disenfranchised from the political process. They haven't really felt the benefits of there's no real peace dividend in a lot of those areas, especially some of those border counties where young people live, or, in relation to young men living in loyalist communities. And, politicians, if they're trying to use those people for their own gain, need to think carefully about what it is they're saying and what it means for the lives of those people.
Okay, Brendan, what's your view on, again, the media, how you cover it, and how what kind of prominence and attention do we give it?
Well, I think, first of all, personally I would love to have more time and more resource to be able to go into detail as to what's going on with Brexit right now, because it is so important for what's going on as we go forward. Unfortunately, the media doesn't have enough time, bodies, resource to put into looking at the intricacies of this. And I suppose also the readership maybe isn't interested that much in the fine detail as to what's going on. But I think there is a role for the media here in terms of scrutinising what people are saying and the implications of it. Of course, the media, has to react to things like what politicians say off the bat. If Arlene Foster or Jim Allister or Michelle O'Neill say something, then that will end up being reported. But I think the media also has to take a role in looking at that, analysing it, scrutinising it, and seeing is what they have said, does that stack up, and try and present that to the public in a summarized way. I think one way that the media has done that of late has been the issue around the threats, or the alleged threats that happened at the ports, and really questioning whether that was a appropriate course of action, or whether that was a proportionate course of action. We saw that Edwin Poots, I suppose just before he left to have medical treatment for cancer, he had taken this decision to withdraw staff from both Larne and Belfast ports, and that decision was taken off the back of what we heard in a Stormont Scrutiny Committee. We heard that decision was taken off the back of speaking to officials in Mid and East Antrim Council, and basically saying that he didn't think that the PSNI's assessment of the threat was taking it seriously enough. So I think the media has been good in looking at that, as to whether that decision you really should have been taken, and sort of going into the detail of that, because it is the case that politicians need to be careful in the language that they employ and how they act, what decisions they make, because obviously that will filter down to society and how society reacts. So, for example, in Brexit, in terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, if we have a minister saying that the threat is so great that we need to pull out staff from the ports, then that can filter down into society, and we can see the ramifications of that. So really, there is a place for the media there to scrutinise the decisions that ministers, MLAs, councillors are making, to see whether it is proportionate to take these actions.
And the other thing about that was, remember, we couldn't scrutinise Edwin Poots because he made it and left. But I mean, that made global headlines. That was making headlines around the world because it was considered that there was a threat to the port. And so decisions like that, and major decisions like that, the Assembly should be making them collectively. One minister shouldn't be doing something which has massive, massive implications. I mean, in terms of practicalities, it caused relatively little disruption because it was solved within a few days and staff are all back at work again. But in terms of the image of this place, if you're trying to sell this to businesses and it looks like, there's gunmen at the ports, that's not going to really do a good job of selling it to business and making the protocol work now, is it? And that should have been a collective decision. So as Brendan says, that's where your role comes in. I use my time as a media to question the Chief Constable in relation to that and ask him what the threat was. Were they asked what the threat was prior to that decision? Brendan has done a lot of work in terms of the council and what their role was in it, because you can't just allow people to make these mad outlandish claims which cause massive headlines all around the world without them making them stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah, okay. Now, obviously, another issue that I want to go back to, it's been a year since Slugger TV has been in its MVTV studio. We have not been back since. We are, February was the last time. So we're currently in lockdown 3.0. We're 2 months in now to it, believe it or not, into our third lockdown. But vaccines are being rolled out at a pace, and Boris Johnson tells us everyone in the UK will get their first jab by July, and over 50s will be sorted in the next few months. Now, quick answers on this, because we've talked about COVID before. Brendan, I want to go to you. Is there reasons for optimism that this could be our last lockdown and that we could be maybe in the summer, maybe not going away on holiday, but we might be back in a bar at least?
Well, I'm optimistic. I hope it is the case that this is the last lockdown. And I think it really depends on how both the executive and the UK and Irish governments deal with this going forward. And really, I think what we need to see is, I suppose, a gradual easing of lockdown restrictions, because I suppose we want to test what impact various different decisions have. And it seems that the executive is moving in that direction. We have, for example, that only a small number of classes or year groups in schools are going to be going back in a number of weeks, and that's going to be for a short period of time. Then they'll be swapped out for another cohort of students. So things like that, small decisions, we can then sort of look at the data and see whether that is having a big impact on COVID case numbers. But running alongside this, or running along parallel to this, is the fact that we have the vaccine rollout, which has been very good. It's probably been the best thing that has happened within the UK government, has been how they have rolled out the vaccine, and it's clearly putting the EU to shame. It's probably a big thing to show why it was good to Brexit in the first place. That rollout is going very well, and if it is the case that the efficacy and the ability of those vaccines to fight against the virus are as they say they are, and they also fight against the new variants, then we will be able to be in a position where we can exit lockdown fully towards the end of the year. But I suppose that is a key point around different variants of the coronavirus. How are they going to develop over time? Are the vaccines that we currently have, are they going to be efficient against those variants going forward? And really, that's a question that we really can't answer at this stage. But I suppose fingers crossed, we can only hope that by a couple of months' time in the summertime, we will be able to have a discussion like this in a pub or in a studio rather than over Zoom.
Brilliant. Okay, Alison, quickly, what's your view? I know you've never been a big fan of the lockdowns.
No way. It's driving me mental. I hate it. And I don't think that this is the end, because we've seen last summer it really eased and come back in the winter. It's a winter virus, and it clearly gets worse in the winter, and there may be other restrictions again coming into the winter next year. But you have to give credit where credit's due. The vaccine rollout's been nothing short of impressive. And given the age difference among this group, I tend to have mine long before either of yours. At which stage I'd be sending just pictures of myself from all sorts of places where I intend to make the most of my immunity from it. It's awful, and in all seriousness, the real problem here is with children and young people and people's mental health and all sorts of other issues that have arisen from this. And I think we'll be mopping up those problems for years and years to come. And the priority needs to be given to those groups of people before they give priority to people like us who want to go out on the piss again. But I really do. I'm hopeful that there'll be some kind of normal summer, but also, that we can really concentrate on trying to get those young people, not just for their education point of view, but from that social interaction point of view, they're locked up in rural communities and probably not seeing another child, for the whole time, children living in flats and all sorts of other situations. That's the priority, and that's what we should be working on. And I really hope that this vaccine makes a massive difference and allows those people to try and get some kind of quality back in their life. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Alison. I want to thank my guests, Allison Morris and Brendan Hughes, and also a big thank you to you for watching. You can keep up to date with everything in the meantime on sluggerotoole.com. Thank you for watching.